Yo, I'm moderating a debut author panel. Not even getting paid for it. What a guy. What a sucker. Saturday, August 15th at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Visit hippocampusmagazine.com to learn more, to see the whole roster, and to sign up. I believe it's free to attend this one panel. It's just sliding scale if you want to contribute some money. But if you want to see me for free, like you do right now, go there, man. ACNFers, little house ad. Want to get better at selling stories? I do. Sometimes the best idea you can come up with is the thing you wish you had when you were starting out. That's what Pitch Club is at welcometopitchclub.substack.com. I was such a frustrated freelancer, still am, not knowing how to pitch, not getting any traction. I know that. I know that now. So Pitch Club is that thing that 2010 Brendan could have used. That son of a bitch. Pitches ranging from agent queries, feature stories, and off-the-cuff unhinged essay pitches, and more. Forever free, that's right. You read a little, you listen a little. You're going to learn a lot, man. Welcome to pitchclub.substack.com.
Like any collaboration, right? Like Lennon and McCartney, right? You have that moment where you kind of look at each other and go, I've been with you too long.
Coming in manic. Hey, CNFers, it's the Atavistian time of the month, but there aren't really any spoilers in this episode, number 540. Ugh. You might want to check out the story first at magazine.atavist.com, or you can listen to this first and then go read the story at magazine.atavist.com. You might want to subscribe to the Atavist as well, and no, I don't get kickbacks or commissions. That's not how I roll. It's a creative nonfiction podcast, a show where I talk to tellers of true tales about the true tales they tell and how they go about the work. I'm Brendan O'Meara, pod farming over here. So Holbrook Mohr and Mitch Weiss are here to talk about toxic lies. For decades, workers at the nuclear facility in Kentucky were exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. Management assured them nothing was wrong. Then four friends risked everything to reveal the truth. It's a whistleblower narrative, and while the story dates back decades, you can feel the weight of the impact of industry encroaching on rural communities now. I'm specifically talking about data centers today. And what catastrophe and oversight will workers be subjected to next? How will they be exploited in the name of shareholders? Ugh. To Holbrook and Mitch's credit, they have very little by way of internet to hold. So Holbrook is on Twitter at Holbrook Mohr, and Mitch is at Mitch S. Weiss on Instagram and Twitter. But I'll give them a greater intro when we reach their part of the podcast. Spoiler alert, there are Pulitzer Prizes involved. Show notes to this episode of more at BrendanO'Meara.com. Hey, does anyone really care about these? There, you can browse the vast backlog of interviews and blog posts and whatever. News, stuff, contact info, I don't know. And sub up to Pitch Club and the Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter, The Monthly Werewolf, which publishes on the full moon every month, and it goes up to 11, wouldn't you know?
These go to 11.
You can follow the show on Instagram at Creative Nonfiction Podcast for my snappy, one-of-a-kind videos. Speaking of videos, I put my unauthorized biography talk, nearly full video, because my phone went to sleep towards the end. Wasn't that fun? Put it up on the Patreon page. Any paid tier can see it, and any paid tier gets access to the Flash 52 sessions. It's a Sunday co-writing space, or coaching talks with me, depending on your tier. Almost nobody takes advantage of this. Patreon.com/CNFpod. So Sayward Darby is the lead editor of this piece. You know her as the editor-in-chief of The Atavist and the author of Sisters in Hate. And we start off by talking about the conversation she's having with her friends and peers about this crazy fucking business we've been in for, 20 to 25 years now. Yeah, it's been a long time, man. It's been a long time. Always great to get Sayward's side of things, so here we go. Cue up the montage.
The writing part is where the magic is for me. The kids these days.
There's a difference between losing and being a loser.
I either work on it or I allow it to torture me for a really long time.
This is going to have to interest somebody somewhere other than me.
as well is like a lot of us now have kind of been in the game for 15 or 20 years, even 25 years. And so the dialogue around how we approach the work and the media landscape changing underfoot is, I don't know, it's very front of mind, I think, for a lot of us. I had to be nimble, but had to stay in it, or maybe had to pivot entirely, and then you just do it as almost like a hobby, like a short story writer at this point. So I just wonder for you, Sayward, just what are what's the dialogue or the conversations you're having with, your friends and colleagues, in the business about just how you're thinking about this kind of work now?
Yeah, I mean, I think that increasingly it's important to be nimble. I mean, I guess that's always been important to some degree, but now more than ever, like I've been struck by, and this month's story, Toxic Lies, is a good example. It's one of a few in the last year or so that I've assigned to long-term, in many cases, I think in all cases actually, like award-winning, like Pulitzer winners or finalists, newspaper writers or wire writers, people who really kind of came up in the industry when it was a very different industry. And now for bigger stories, for more sort of certainly narrative-driven stories, but just more ambitious projects, they are, looking to a place like the Atavist, which I mean, I think is great. I think it means that the Atavist is, looking good to people. But I also think it's indicative of just sort of how the industry is changing and like the requirements, again, for being nimble, right? For being like, well, maybe places that I used to think about publishing or that I did publish, maybe it's not necessarily even that a story wouldn't be a fit. It's like, well, what kind of story do I want to tell? What kind of attention do I want an editor to pay to it? And so I think that it's been striking to me that more sort of traditional industry folks are looking to places. And I don't think the Atavist is alone in this. And, part of it is because of things like layoffs and downsizing and, people who've lost jobs and are looking to place great stories, or people whose remit has narrowed substantially or whatever. But I also do think it's also a matter of, especially if you've been around a while, what makes the story great. And you're like, okay, well, what is it going to take now for that to happen? And like maybe the resources have dried up at certain places where they used to exist. And so, yeah, I think it's important to be nimble, but I also think it's important to, like, in doing so, have a good grasp of the landscape, right? And be aware of, and this is definitely something that, I talk to colleagues and fellow editors about, places that have good reputations for, good editorial support. If I have a story about X, like what's a good home for it? Not just from the standpoint of do they publish those types of stories, but, who would I work with there? And, what kind of resources would I have? So, the long and short of it is it's a lot more work for the actual people doing the creative stuff. But I think that's just the game now,
Especially in the book world too. And I talked with Mitch and Holbrook about this as well, because they see this Toxic Lies story as book worthy. But they were like, they wanted to take it to a place like the Atavist to really stress test the narrative and like start using that attention to kind of bolster their platform, so then they become a bit more attractive to publishers too. So not only is the story maybe going to have the legs it deserves through Atavistian channels, but then it's like, okay, they get the piggyback of that degree of platform. And so that idea, and I guess there's always been this maybe magazine story to book, but they were thinking of like, this is a way you almost, as my editor who rejected the Ken Griffey Jr. thing, he was like, you got someone without the legacy backing of a big media institution like The Athletic or ESPN or whatever. He's like, you got to make your own weather. Mm-hmm. And so many writers now, without that legacy media backing, have to have that platform and make their own weather and make themselves as attractive as possible. And it's just so it's really, really hard
It is. It's
to do that when
hard.
you don't have the tailwind of that legacy media.
Yeah, no, it's incredibly hard. And I think that what's even harder is, I mean, to kind of like continue with the metaphor, it's like, you know, the airlines have consolidated and a lot of them have gone out of business. And, you know, if you're just thinking of, I think this metaphor makes sense. Like if you're just thinking about, you know, who creates what, it's like, they're just aren't that, you know, I'm not saying anything new, right? Like we all know what's happening to the industry, but so then it's also a matter of like, okay, well, you know, only so many people can benefit from the tailwind of the New York Times or the Washington Post is whatever the Washington Post has become of late. I mean, there are still people doing great work there, but obviously, you know, deeply problematic, everything that went on with the layoffs. And so it's like, okay, how do I create my own weather, but also being comfortable with maybe the weather not being quite what it used to be, you know? And like figuring out, okay, like I can create weather with this, but then I got to create different weather over here. And you know what I mean? It's like, it's just work. It's just work. And I think it's not fair that people who are doing great reporting and telling great stories like have to do that work now. It would be nice if more institutions supported it. But at the same time, I don't know, like I would guess that at least for some writers, there's like a certain degree of freedom in creating your own weather.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's the ones who will, and I categorize Mitch and Holbrook in this category. I have to do that with myself as well, is like embrace it. If you don't, you're just going to be bitter and on the side of the road, just like wondering like when your bus is going to come by. It's just like, fact of the matter is, it's like, this is the ecosystem. Swim with that current. If you keep trying to swim up that current, you're going to burn out and then be on the side of the river and just be like, you know what, I'm just going to go over.
Yeah.
Just leave altogether or something.
Yeah. I think that's right. I mean, they probably, I don't know. Did they kind of explain like the genesis of this story and kind of how it wound up with us?
Yes, I believe they do. Sometimes these conversations blend in my head and I kind of forget, but I only spoke to them yesterday. I should know this, but they did allude to that a little bit, but maybe you can kind of pick up that baton and kind of as you bat lead off, you can kind of set the table in that regard.
Yeah. So, I mean, my understanding, and I don't think I'm like speaking out of turn here, is that they had initially thought of it as a book. And great, that makes sense to me. Like, it's an incredible story with incredibly rich characters. And there's all these different, to me, like interesting things you could do with regard to the history of the nuclear industry, the history of various types of like pollution and covering it up and whatever, like all kinds of things you could do that would, you know, have this really strong narrative spine about what happened in Paducah. But then, you know, speak to kind of a wider environment, literally.
Yeah, and the Cold War.
Right, exactly. The Cold War
too.
aspect, sort of like the patriotic nature. I actually, well, I'll get to this in a second. I think somebody should just write a book about Paducah being a punching bag of late stage capitalism. But I think, you know, I can't remember, or I don't know that they ever like articulated exactly like why it didn't take off as a book project. But my understanding was that it really had to do with just like appetite in the book industry, right? Appetite in the nonfiction space. And, you know, we talk so much about how magazines are doing, newspapers are doing, like book publishing is not doing great either. And, you know, things that were like a shoe-in, not least because of these guys' profile and like the work they've done together previously on a book, you know, should have made that an easy sell. And for whatever reason, it wasn't. But rather than saying, okay, well, darn, that didn't work out, they thought, okay, well, then what can we do with it, right? And like, how can we still do right by our subjects, but also like we feel passionately about the material? Where do we go? What do we do? And I mean, who knows? Like, I don't know if they still are hopeful that this would, you know, eventually become a book and maybe like this is sort of a proof of concept kind of thing. Or, you know, who knows, maybe we get film and TV interest, whatever it may be. But I think, you know, to your point, it's like, they thought they were going to catch one bus. That didn't work out. And so they had to like, you know, hail a taxi. You know what I mean? Like, and I mean, that's been happening forever, for as long as, you know, publishing has been a concern. But I think increasingly that like, oh, I need to pivot. Like, I thought it was going to go this way. This was the plan. No, it's not. Like, this is going to be the way of doing it. And I'm obviously like thrilled that it landed with us, but I also, can imagine the frustration of being like, but I see it, right? Like I see the version of things that like I want it to be. And then having to, I wouldn't say downsize exactly, but just reorient, and say, okay, well then what else is it?
Yeah, and we kind of talked about that too, and how nimble they were being about it, like stress testing the story, trying to build its own energy and ecosystem around it. So they're like, oh, there is a built-in audience who is a bit hungry for more. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the death of the dad book, quote, dad book. And that's what I heard from my editor of The Front Runner too, when he turned down the Griffey thing. He's like, yeah, like sports biographies and narrative history, it's like it's a tough sell. And like you have to make such a solid case that someone's going to spend $32 on a hardcover. Otherwise, we can't take it on. The narrative podcast space has really pirated a lot of what would be called the dad book. And I was like, that sucks. That's my jam. That's a lot of other people too. And it's all incumbent upon people to, if you can't port your audience in and like prove that you have people like hungry for it, and that's just all the more harder to do. But that's what Mitch and Holbrook are playing the long game of the story, which is incredible. And because there's so much to this story, how did you keep it lean and propulsive, given that there could be so many tributaries to this?
Yeah, I would say that was not hard insofar as like the draft they provided was already quite far along. I think they had a good sense of what it takes to, build propulsion, sustain it. Certainly the characters that they were able to draw out, and including, folks that they never spoke to because they passed away, they were still really able to bring them to life. So I don't recall in the editing process much cutting of like, well, this is interesting, but it's more of, sort of like a book chapter, or like, the middle of a book chapter or whatever. I think they actually had a pretty strong sense of the balance required. But it is one of those, it's history, obviously. And, but then there's also science involved in it. And so I do remember I had them write a much longer explanation of uranium enrichment because the thing is, it isn't, we can all like, you can describe uranium enrichment very quickly, but what was important was that you kind of had to know the various like stages that the uranium goes through, because in the process, like there's this type of dust, and then there's this type of dust, and then there's this type of gas. And like, there are then references throughout the piece to exposures to those different phases. And so you have to kind of like really be clear about what, kind of giving readers like the tools they need to understand, like, oh, well, when we say this person was being exposed to this, it's because they were at that phase of the enrichment process, whatever. Anyway, so I had them write a pretty long paragraph about all of this, and then our copy editor was like, this might be a little too long. he was like I appreciate the like what you're giving me here, and I was like, that's totally fair. And so like went back, and it's still in there, but it's definitely reduced a bit. But I think that's also a good example. Like, I'm not a science and tech math person, and so especially when I'm reading stories like this, I'm like, explain it to me like I'm an idiot, because I am actually. And like, let's assume that some of our readers are like me. And so, let's like put it all out there. And then somebody who is smarter, like our copy editor, is like, you don't have to be that much of an idiot. But yeah, I think that Paducah is such an interesting place. And, this is obviously mentioned in the beginning of the piece and also a little bit at the end, part of the urgency, because this isn't just history, right? Like, yes, it is history because this is about a whistleblower case that, the vast majority of the action happened in the 90s, but people are still suffering from what happened, first of all. And so, there are a ton of people who are probably owed compensation that they haven't received. It sounds like there haven't been great environmental studies done of the plant and the surrounding area to really grasp like how bad the pollution has been and how bad it has been for people's health. But then what's mentioned at the beginning and the end of the piece is that they're about to build 2 new uranium enrichment plants. They're on the site of the old one. And this is all part of the second Trump administration's big push for like energy independence. And what these guys, these whistleblowers who are still alive, are saying is like, we don't want to repeat history, basically. And like, we're not convinced that that anything is going to go better if you set up these operations again. And I think that goes for not just Paducah. Like, this is something that's happening around the country as part of this push. And then on top of that, there's and this kind of came up at the last minute, but I think it was implicit. It became explicit because right before we published, it was announced that a massive AI data center is going to be built in Paducah. And that's its own can of deadly worms, right? Yes. In terms of, what that can do. So we're talking about a massive AI data center and 2 uranium enrichment facilities. Like, that is bananas. That's just so much that's going to, destroy the earth, destroy lives, etc. Of course, create jobs, whatever. But like, what these guys are saying, these guys worked at this plant. Like, they kept working at this plant, even though they knew, the problems. And part of that was because they wanted to expose what was going on, but they also like believed in the work and wanted it to be done right and done better. What they're saying now is this sort of the establishment of these new facilities. We are in no way convinced that things will be better for people, safer for the environment. And I think that's obviously an extremely fair assumption given what's been going on with the gutting of our regulatory state. But I think that even before the explicit aspect of the AI data center being built or being announced in Paducah, it was sort of quietly there in the piece, like this idea that these facilities, whether, once upon a time they were nuclear or, textile mills that were polluting water or whatever, now we have AI data centers. Like, these places are built, they provide much needed jobs, they support important aspects of the economy, but then the same stuff happens over and over and over, right? Like, environmental harms, cover-ups, people get cancer, like, and it's just like a tale as old as American industry, right? And so I think in that way, and this is something that I think, in a longer like book form, you could really play around with, is sort of this like wider industrial legacy, and how this is a chapter in it, an extremely compelling one, but it is just a chapter. And, there are all these other parts that you could, tell alongside this central story.
Well, yeah, it is a fascinating story, and you see you see it time and time again. You're alluding to it, of history always repeating itself with this, whether it's industry will constantly skirt that razor's edge. Like, how can we cut costs, cut safety, without getting busted? And then sure enough, the local economy is bolstered by those jobs, and they're willing to like compromise their long-term health for the very short-term need of having to live and put food on the table, and they know they exploit that, and that's what's so sad about it.
It is. And I do think, look, this has been, Erin Brockovich was, such a sensational story, and then obviously such a big movie, etc., because people, have felt strongly about these cases, these types of stories for a long time. But again, I do think that telling stories like this in a moment where day after day after day, they're trying to distract us with a dumb war in Iran and with, freaking out about trans people. But really what and that's all.
And Fauci's diary.
Right, Fauci's diary, like any number of things. But what they are doing behind the scenes, not even behind the scenes, they're just destroying the regulatory state, right? And so, what's going to be left? Assuming that, a administration eventually comes in that gives a crap about the environment and people's health, like, what's going to be left to protect that? And so when you simultaneously have this push to build these, potentially, yes, job generating, but also dangerous facilities at the same time that the regulatory state is a shell of its former self, if you could even call it that, what is that a recipe for? I think we know the answer. But that's all to say, like, I think that on the one hand, this is a history, this story is a history, but I also think like there is something deeply urgent about it, because the same sort of language that was used to, encourage people to take jobs there, keep jobs there, to feel, a part of something important. This sort of, you're helping the national economy, you're also helping national security, et cetera. Like, those same messages are being used, with the sort of construction and expansion of these other facilities. Yeah, I don't know. There's an urgency to it that I think we're the Atavists. We're never going to beat you over the head with it. We're never going to be like, this matters now because, that's just not what we do. But I think that this piece like very much has a bullhorn quality to it.
Yeah. And just one more thing, Sayward, is you work with a lot of different writers at various points in their career, and here you have a Pulitzer Prize winner in Mitch and a Pulitzer finalist in Holbrook. So you're working with like two very accomplished writers and reporters, working on the same story together. They're such a tandem. It's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Just what's it like for you to work with writers of that caliber that are that accomplished coming to you?
Oh, I mean, it's amazing. I still feel a little bit like, I don't know, when are they going to realize the emperor has no clothes and like I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know if that's the right phrase to use, but I, even though I've been in this industry for 20 years now, more or less, have been editing for the vast majority of that time, there is still some piece of me that's like, surely they're going to realize that, I'm a noob and don't know what I'm doing. But no, I mean, I think that, I think I probably said this about Barry's piece as well, because Barry, a Pulitzer guy himself, you definitely learn, as an editor, I learn a lot about, I'm always impressed by the economy. I think I said this about Barry too. Like, I'm always impressed with these longtime seasoned folks, that they really understand economy of language. Even in this case, we ended up kind of cutting some dialogue that was in the story just because it was like, we can't confirm verbatim that this is, yes, it was probably the gist of what was said. We're not sure. But even like, when I say economy of language, I mean, there's no like unnecessary adjectives and adverbs and flourishes, and you're just telling a story. I think that these two in particular had a really great knack for every section felt like it had a strong scene in it. And I think if you go through, and they even had like a pretty noticeable like ability to, for me as an editor, it was like each section was like often started with a scene. It was like, we are letting we are dropping you in, right? Like, these people are standing at the door of the cafeteria. They are sitting at the table, in someone's kitchen. Awesome.
Well, now we're going to turn it over to Mitch and Holbrook. As always, Sayward, thank you so much for sharing your side of the tape. That was dope. Okay, now we've got Holbrook and Mitch. It's always an intricate dance navigating multiple guests on the show, and get used to it because in a couple weeks, two authors will again share the stage for this new book on the NFL called The Playbook. Anyway, that's down the road. That'll be in September sometime. Holbrook and Mitch, get a load of this shit, are award-winning journalists, formerly with the Associated Press, I believe. I believe they have left. I could fact check that, but I'm not, because I'm pretty confident. Somewhat confident. A little bit confident. They have reported together on a culture of abuse in the U.S. gymnastics program, the use of, quote, less lethal force by police, and the dangers of medical devices known as spinal cord stimulators. They are the co-authors of the book Broken Faith, Inside One of America's Most Dangerous Cults. Mitch won the Pulitzer Prize as an investigative journalist, I believe in 2004, and Holbrook is a Pulitzer finalist. They have been working together as a tandem since 2009, lots of that work for the AP, and now independently as they navigate the choppy waters of freelance investigative journalism and book writing. In this conversation, we talk about their collaboration and trust with one another, the death of the dad book, stress testing a story as a magazine story before a book, adapting and being nimble, keeping interviews short, developing trust with sources over time, slowing things down, hearing how sentences sound and how they decompress after reporting on very intense material. So let's waste no more time. Was that a waste of time? I don't think so, but maybe? Parting shot on forgetting how to do the thing. Let's do this. Riff.
Well, Bert and I met each other when I rejoined the Associated Press in 2008.
He's not going to know who Bert is. That's a nickname.
Oh, I'm sorry. You know what? Okay. I met Holbrook, and you warned me about that. It's these headphones.
I texted him earlier and said, try to remember Holbrook. That is my professional name.
Yeah, I am
I
an
texted
idiot.
and called.
It still didn't register because I'm an idiot. But Holbrook and I met in 2008 when he was on the AP investigative team and I rejoined the Associated Press. I had worked there in the 90s and rejoined in 2008. And we just hit it off immediately. When you collaborate with someone, you have to have a chemistry. You have to be on the same page. And you have to push each other. And more importantly, you have to trust each other. And to be honest, because honesty is the most important part of a collaboration, of a partnership. And there have been times where Holbrook has had to say to me, hey, man, you're going too far. And I've said the same. So that honesty is really imperative and important to a good relationship. And we've worked on a ton of investigative stories over the year. And we wrote a book together in 2020, Broken Faith, which was based on another Associated Press project. And Holbrook and I are just good friends as well. So it's great that we have that personal connection and that professional one. And we challenge each other. And we never get angry at each other. But there are moments where, like any collaboration, right? Like Lennon and McCartney, right? You have that moment where you kind of look at each other and go, I've been with you too long. And it's almost like we're married, we're a married couple. But really, it's a wonderful professional relationship. And you have to have, like I said, that trust. That's the most important aspect.
I agree. And I think when it comes to the writing, it helps that Mitch and I, we have similar worldviews and we have a similar voice to our writing. So it doesn't look choppy to readers. It's easy for him to take a chapter and I'll take another chapter and we can just make it flow together. And I guess some of that just comes from working together so closely for so many years. We've done a lot of big projects, but yeah, I agree with everything Mitch said. It comes down to trust. When you take on a big 13,000 word story and you're going to break it up and he's going to research some documents, I need to know that, he's going to do a thorough job, which I know he will from experience. He always does.
Yeah, and Mitch, you said a moment ago in terms of that, that dynamic in where maybe you'd be like, oh, you're going too far here, maybe reel it back in. What does that look like? What does that mean to maybe to push it too far, to go too far?
When you read a document or you interview someone, we always footnote everything and we always make sure we have everything down. And so there may be a document and maybe I'm not exaggerating, but maybe I'm pushing it. Does the document really say this? And there's Holbrook saying, no, you can't go that far. And so we discuss that. And that's really important because you want to be accurate so that when people read it, there's no questions about the integrity of a story. And sometimes there could be a tendency to interpret documents differently, but we don't. And again, if I'm going too far, then Holbrook will call me on it. But it's really about that. What can you say based on the interviews and documents?
And Holbrook, you kind of brought that up too, that you have similar writing styles and so maybe even a repertorial sensibility too. So you almost feel like you kind of have, I'm interpreting a little bit here, but kind of a shared brain in a sense, having worked together for so long. But when it comes to writing and even the reporting, but especially the writing, like how do you guys keep a uniformity to the piece so to your point, it doesn't feel chunky?
Again, I think that we just have very similar writing styles. The way we approach a narrative piece, it's just similar. We look for as many details as we can. We really like those details. And we're both very thoughtful about how we approach the subjects of our work, because, these aren't characters that we're trying to create. These are people who we are trying to represent in a fair way. So I just think all those elements of reporting, we're very similar. So when it comes time to put it on paper, it just seems to come natural for us.
Yeah, and when you're approaching a subject matter like this piece for the Atavist, and you have the sensitive subject matter, and you want to honor the people at the center of it for the sacrifices they made and the courage that they put forth. How do you honor your sources in a story of this nature?
You tell the truth. You present them the way they are in real life. And the only way you get to do that is by interviewing them, knowing them. It's kind of like a method actor in a way. You get to know these people so well, it's almost like you're inside their heads, inside their brains. And I think that's really important, is the patience of interviewing and listening to them. It's a skill that Holbrook and I both have, because you want to know them as well. So for Ron Fowler, it wasn't just one interview. We're talking about dozens of interviews. It was trying to meet him in person, to look at his mannerisms, and that's how we came up with the lead. We were calling him just to make sure that he was going to make it to Paducah, and a nurse answered his phone. And when Holbrook and I discussed that, we realized that's the thread of the story. He's in that hospital room. He doesn't know if he's going to make it, but his friend Chuck is going to be there. And that's how we started to, outline that narrative, even before, we got to Paducah and started writing.
Right. And given the stakes seem are very high to the story, too, and the stakes of the reporting are such, because sources of a certain age who are sick, who are affected by the stuff that was happening in Atomic City, their time is more finite than others, and coming up closer to the end than the beginning. So what sense of urgency did you guys feel as you were reporting this out?
Well, I think toward the end, about halfway through the reporting process, that's when we realized the urgency was when we were ready to drive to Paducah to meet with these guys, and Ron couldn't make it. And he said himself, he did not know if he was going to survive that stay in the hospital. The urgency kind of just revealed itself. It was, it was there. You could not ignore it. Fortunately, we were able to get this story told. It was very important to these guys to tell this story, and we were able to do it.
Yeah, and speaking of the story writ large, so how did you guys find the story?
It was brought to us by our agent with an idea for a book, which is what we still would like to do. But Mitch was familiar with the Atavists, and he thought, let's see if they want this thing. Let's get this story out there. And fortunately, they wanted it, and we think we had a really good working relationship with them. It was a smooth process. We think there's more to this story to tell, and we hope to tell it.
Well, exactly. I think that there's so much stuff on the cutting room floor. Holbrook and I are used to writing long form pieces, and we wrote a book together, 80,000 words. This, I think, is about 13. So there's a lot more material that we can use. In fact, it was really hard to cut it to 13,000 words, because are we leaving this out? This is important. There's so much more to tell of this story.
Especially when you think that this is a story that unfolded over a period of decades, involving, multiple people, multiple corporations, different kinds of chemicals and radiation. There's so much to tell, but we're really pleased with the way the Atavist story came together. We got some great work. We think it was presented beautifully. The presentation I really like. We got some good editing. It was a good process.
Nice. And I love this idea of that you've conceived of it, at least intellectually, as a book, but you're like, why don't we maybe audition it as a magazine story too? And so maybe what can writers out there learn from maybe turning the dial down to maybe the book ambitions, and see if do the magazine story and see if it wants to be more, see if it demands more of it?
I think with there's a changing market with publishers. I mean, the Wall Street Journal had a story a couple of months ago about the death of dad books, those narrative nonfiction books. And that's what we do best, is narrative nonfiction. And so what publishers are looking for these days, it seems like from our experience, it's not so much the story, it's how many followers you have. So they have that built-in market, so it's not as much of a risk. And I think what authors should do is like look at alternatives, look at other platforms first, whether it's the Atavist or maybe it's a Substack, to see if there's interest, to generate that interest so that publishers look at it and say, wow, that is a good story. And they're not looking at, oh, do you have 1 million followers, 2 million followers? And one thing Holbrook and I did when we worked for the Associated Press was we never went on social media to tout our work. We always thought that our work stood for itself, that we didn't have to go out there, because I think to a certain degree that we were a little uncomfortable with social media, because a lot of it is, saying, hey, look at what I did. And we're behind the scenes guys, but we also realize that with this changing marketplace, there has to be that balance. So for authors, don't be stuck in your old ways. Don't write a 100-page proposal, send it to your agent. It might be a waste of time. Instead, see if that story is going to resonate with, a magazine like the Atavist, or again, like a Substack or other platforms first.
And, also, if you do write that proposal and it's a good subject matter and you don't get that deal you're looking for, there are alternatives like the Atavist. So, don't give up on it, especially if it's an important subject. There are other ways to tell those stories.
Yeah, your point of the dad books of narrative nonfiction. I recently went through a situation like that. So as a follow-up to this biography I'd written, I had pitched the Ken Griffey Jr. biography that was subsequently rejected, based largely on the dad book industry having kind of cratered, and it's moved a lot towards narrative podcasting as well. So that's really eaten into that market. My editor was just gracious enough to tell me, he's like, you really need to make, if people are going to spend $32 on this, you need to make a rock hard, locked up case for that product to be on a bookshelf. And if you can't do that, you're really in trouble, like especially in this day and age. So I love you saying of like stress testing the story with other avenues and then building an audience and a platform that you can maybe leverage a greater, maybe potentially a book contract down the road. But yeah, you kind of have to stress test it almost. Yeah,
you do. And, it's one of these things that we had to learn. When we left the Associated Press in 2025, one of the reasons we left was because we wanted to write narrative nonfiction books. And we didn't realize the whole market had changed, that 10 years earlier, it was a different market, and some of our proposals could have sold easily. So, yeah, we had to learn that the hard way, but we did, and we're adapting now and adjusting, and I think we'll be okay. I really do enjoy the long form magazine pieces, Substack. We are launching our own podcast soon, so it's all good. You have to be flexible enough to adjust.
You have to adapt.
And when you were conceiving of the pitch and pitching to the Atavist, to what extent, and you can extend this to other pitches you've done, how much pre-reporting do you put into a pitch before you feel pretty confident in shopping it around?
Oh, we put a lot of work into the pitch. I mean, we essentially, what we had to pitch with the Atavist was a book proposal, and when we do a nonfiction proposal, we do a lot of research, because we don't want any publisher to feel like they got a bait and switch, like we were guessing for the proposal and we're just planning to do the hard research later. We don't want to change, and we don't want any surprises. So our proposals are probably more thorough than they need to be, and they're fact checked. They're solid.
Yeah. The other thing is, I think that our proposals are an extension of what we had to do with the Associated Press. We were on the global investigation team, and before you could really go to your editor and say, look, we want to do X, Y, and Z, we had to know what we were talking about. So you had to do that pre-research before you went to them. Otherwise, it could be shot down, in the pitch process. So we are very careful to make sure that we do our due diligence before we come forward with any proposal.
Yeah, that's really great points to underscore. I think a lot of us, and I know I'm guilty of this probably to this day, of not doing maybe quite enough legwork up front of securing enough sources, securing enough documents, providing 100%, yes, I have access to this, because you want to take all that mystery away for the editors assigning the story. Like, you can leave mystery and teasers, like, all for the reader. That's all good. The editors need to know, like, they need to know the end of this. They need to know that there's a shape to this thing. And if you don't, there's like, and you don't maybe have a body of work to back it up, it's like, I can't in good faith assign this to you. So yeah, it's good to hear you guys saying, yeah, you got to do a lot of legwork, because I think a lot of us are, because that's free labor too. So some of us might not put as much in because we're like, I don't want to work too hard in case this gets rejected, but you can almost assure it's going to get rejected if you don't do enough.
Right.
Well, exactly. And what we found is that if you have a thorough proposal, that becomes the foundation for the book. And so you're really killing two birds with one stone. And the other thing is, it's okay not to know all the answers to, the questions and to the actual investigation. But there has to be enough there that you go, there is something, and we're going to keep reporting, and this is how we're going to do it. So you shouldn't give up just because you don't have all the answers in front of you.
Yeah, if you're doing all that research and stuff for, say, a book proposal, I love the killing two birds with one stone, because it might reveal itself to only want to be a magazine story, and then you're going to save yourself years and years of like banging your head up against a wall of a book. And it's like, okay, then you can pivot to something else. But there's almost no harm in doing a bit more of that legwork and more of that research, because and it never goes to waste, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yeah,
and if you do get a book deal, you have the structure of what the book will be, with miniature chapters. You have a great outline to start with, a factually correct outline. And if you don't get the deal, then you have a solid pitch to make to a magazine like The Atavist.
Yeah.
It could pay off in the end. You're right. There's a risk. Maybe it goes nowhere. But if it does, you've got a head start.
But here's the beauty, too, that the platforms, there are so many platforms out there for your work that, 5, 6, 7 years ago, if you got shut down with a book deal, really, what was there to do? I mean, I guess you could self-publish. But now you have all the magazines, you have the Substack. There are so many podcasts to get that story out. So it's really not a waste of time to do all that hard work up front.
Yeah, I love hearing that. There's sometimes a governor on that research engine for some people. It's nice to take off that restrictor plate, to use NASCAR terms. I used to cover a lot of NASCAR for Bleacher Report. But take that restrictor plate off and then just kind of let it rip. And not to beat a dead horse on that topic, but I love hearing the way you guys are articulating that.
Well, there was another need in this particular book, and that's what we discussed earlier, was that, time is a factor. For these guys, they'll be the first one to tell you that, they're sick.
Yeah.
And so as we were doing the proposal, we're gathering as much information as we can, because what if we get a contract or a magazine article or a book deal, we have to have that information in case they're not around to finish the project.
Yeah.
And, that's a real concern. So we wanted to preserve as much of their history as we could.
And this was such a important project for us, because the more we learn, we just looked at each other and said, wow, you mean the government knew this back in 1953 and they put profits over workers? Why weren't they told? There was a sense of outrage with this, that we had to tell their story, and also what they did and how they did it, because that had never been told before. Sneaking in at work after dark, taking documents, collaborating with each other, and it was all about, saving workers' lives, even though they put their own at risk. I'm not sure a lot of people would have done that, and so in a way, we just were, taken with that story of how they risked their lives to help others, because they could have just walked away. They could have quit and said, that's it. And they didn't. And when you get a story like that, you hold on to it and you want other people to read it because these are heroic people. And, I asked myself this question, how would I have reacted if I were them back in the day? Would I have walked away? Would I have done what I would hope I would have done? But you don't know. And that's what makes a story like this so fascinating.
And, for people who are unfamiliar with Paducah and the Atomic City, just take us to the world building of this place in Kentucky and what they were up to and their place in the world.
The plant was opened in 1952 to enrich uranium for atomic weapons during the Cold War. Later, it was used to enrich uranium for nuclear power plants and Navy nuclear subs and ships. And the big issue was that these patriotic people who thought, I'm helping out my country to fend off communism and win this Cold War, were told that the stuff they were working with was safe. And in fact, it was not. And they weren't told exactly what they were working with. There was plutonium in there, which there should not have been any plutonium more than trace amounts because this place was designed to enrich uranium. And hundreds or, if not thousands of them got sick, cancer, other ailments. The government lied to them. That's no secret. The government has admitted to it, but the damage is done for a lot of these folks, and a lot of them haven't been compensated.
And it really feels of the moment too. I feel because now with all these data centers coming in and really encroaching on a lot of rural communities, I feel like even though this story takes place generations ago and feels even into the more modern day, but it does feel this is a canary in the coal mine or a little harbinger of things to come with the industry that's encroaching on communities that we're seeing right to this very day.
Yeah. I mean, those early memos that we found, the government knew, and there was a debate, should we warn the workers? But what it came down to is, well, if we warn the workers about the dangers, well, then they might want more money. They might want hazard pay. We have to test them. And so they're having this debate. Meanwhile, the workers are being told there's nothing wrong. It's safe. And to make that point, there were cases where a manager would sprinkle some of this stuff on a sandwich and eat it and say, sure, look at me, I'm not getting sick. But it was a cumulative thing. Going in every day, it kept building and building and building. And there were no tests to see how that radiation was building inside. But the fact that they knew early on, from like 1952, 53, and said nothing to the workers, that it was all about money and keeping production going, that's a cautionary tale. That is, it was really hard to believe that our government would do it, and yet they did.
And not only did they deceive these workers, they blamed the workers for the problems created at the plant. Like in the case of Joe Harding, they said all the problems he had, stomach problems, were from eating too much country ham and smoking cigarettes. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And that man, he tried to raise the alarm, but people just did not want to believe him. They believed these contractors in the government over him.
And in the whistleblowers at the heart of it, they're the ones who are in a sense ostracized and sort of criminalized within that community, because if what they were saying was true, then perhaps the plant has to shut down and then all these people are out of work. And so there was almost another level of courage that they displayed, that they were going to essentially be pariahed in their own community.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, they had death threats. People driving slowly by their houses. Ron Fowler had his car damaged, vandalized. Yeah, there was a lot of personal sacrifices that they made. They're brave men. And so was Kay, Chuck's wife, and Bud Gardner, the one who passed. They were all brave. It was really a heroic thing that they did. Yeah.
And there was risk, because there was a time where they were using a picture of Ron, some of the security people, on the shooting range. And so he got, the little, picture of like bullet holes in him. I mean, they were aiming at him. And so how are you going to react when you see something like that? Or you get those phone calls in the middle of the night saying, you better back off or else. I mean, the strain it put on his marriage, put on him. I mean, he told us straight up that, he had to self-medicate at points to get through it all. And for what? I mean, because he wanted to tell the truth, because he wanted to protect his workers, and that's what he got in return.
Yeah, a lot of this reminds me of Jared Sullivan's book, Valley So Low, that came out a couple years ago about it's in Tennessee, about the coal ash. Yeah, the dam broke and this coal ash stuff was all over the place. And similarly, all the workers in the community were getting sick as a result of a really criminal negligence on the part of the government and the overseers. And it just goes to show that this is a story almost as old as time. As long as capitalism is involved in something of this nature, they will cut every corner possible and put the workers out there as the front line and say, like, take the brunt of this until they'll push it until they have to shut down.
Well, the amazing part about this was that we're talking about generations of workers. This was a community that welcomed this plant. There weren't many jobs in this community before the plant opened. You worked in the coal mines. There were some other jobs, but basically people had to move to get good paying, middle-class jobs. And so for generations, like a father, a son, they would all work there from the early 50s all the way up. And so it became like kind of the economic backbone of the community. But on the other hand, there was this deep, dark secret that the government did not want disclosed because they were afraid it was going to, the workers would want more money and they want more protection. And so they hid it from them. So generations of families were affected by the plant.
And so as you're gathering your materials and you're setting to start to write the piece, how are you thinking about the structure and how you guys wanted to lay this out?
It kind of unfolded. We had an idea of what we wanted to do. It's a chronological story. You kind of have to tell it in that way. And then the beginning and end just kind of developed on their own, with that phone call to Ron saying, "Hey, man, we look forward to meeting you tomorrow." And that really finalized the structure of the story.
Yeah, I think with a complicated story, because there could have been a tendency here to really drill down on the uranium, the enrichment, and then you lose the humanity of the story. So we wanted to know the people better and infuse that into the story so that it just read well. So we knew we would have to, for confusion's sake, just lay it out on a very linear version. Okay, we're going to start from Ron's first day and we're going to go here. But that beginning and end just came to us. I remember calling Holbrook as I was driving up there saying, "I think this is the lead." And I pulled off on the side of the road, and it just came to us as we were bouncing ideas off each other. Start with Ron, build the tension, because at that point we had no idea whether or not he was going to pick up the phone. And that's how we decided to structure it. But yeah, telling it in a linear version, because that way it's not complicated for readers and laid out smoothly that way.
Well, I love hearing you talk about the kind of laying out the time. Like, do you guys create sort of a shared timeline of events so you're just seeing how things really unspool from your reporting?
Right, and as you get more documents, you start to see the timeline develop. We're saying, okay, Ron is telling us when he started at this plant in the 90s, this was happening, but then we get a document that shows, well, it goes back to 70. And then you find another document that says, well, actually, the government knew what was there in 1953. So, it all unfolded as part of our research and reporting.
And you have to, I think it's important when you have so many, dates that you put together that timeline. And what we do is we share everything in a Google Doc and we're adding in and then we'll discuss it. But having that timeline is critical, I think, to the story.
Yeah. And when you're working together to structure a narrative too, to what extent are you outlining or not outlining as you progress?
We're not real big outliners. We kind of have a vision and we talk about it and we figure out what we want to do, like what the chapters is. Be more like really developing chapter summaries than an outline, I think, is the way that we operate. And you can always move those around. I mean, I guess it's similar to an outline, but it's not a very formal outline like I've seen a lot of reporters use. That's never really been our style.
it's like hard enough to do the to write these kind of things, just one writer and an editor, and setting up your own rituals and routines through which you can actually get the work done. But now when you put two cooks in the kitchen, it's might be even more challenging. So I don't know, just how do you coordinate with each other when you're taking on various chapters and setting internal deadlines within yourself? How does that operate?
Communication.
Yeah.
We talk a lot and email every day. It's not like, well, I say every day, most days, when we come up with a plan, we'll say, okay, Mitch, I'm going to write chapter 1 and this will be the focus, and he'll start on chapter 2 and that'll be his focus. And then when we finish, we'll come together, swap them out, talk about them, refine them, and, massage them where it flows from one chapter to the next.
Yeah. And I joked around at the very beginning, but to a certain extent, it's true. Holbrook and I it's like we're a married couple in a way. We're talking every day, and, like Holbrook said, we're discussing, okay, you take this, I'll take this, and what are we going to say? And because our writing style is so similar, everything blends together. It's a real smooth process.
So just from your point of view, what was a challenge of this piece, of a code that was maybe you had difficulty cracking, if you will?
Well, it is complicated. The first time that we talked to Chuck, he said, what do you guys know about isotopes? Which wasn't much. So it was a complicated subject matter that you had to condense. You have to explain the science, but you have to do it in a way that does not break up the narrative flow. You don't ever want to get a reader to, page 3 and they go, oh man, this whole page is about gaseous diffusion, and I don't understand any of it. I'm quitting on this story. So to blend, the human elements with the science, I think, was a challenge. And
we have a history of doing that. We've worked on, complicated investigative stories before that involve science. And so we know how to do that. But before you can even attempt that, you have to really become an expert in that subject. And so you have to read a lot. You have to talk to each other. You have to make sure you fully understand it before you can even write it and try to simplify it for readers. It can be but there's a beauty to it, because every investigative project, you're learning something new. And it's a lot of fun diving into those subjects, whether it's faulty medical devices like we've done, or uranium enrichment. It's actually a lot of fun, that whole learning process.
Oh yeah, and that material is it can be easily discarded if you can't cultivate really good character. Because once you have the characters, then you're along for the ride. So just when you're reporting out and interviewing, just how are you thinking of putting the most compelling character on the page? And, of course, we don't make anything up, but how were you creating that character? So then we are reading about TRUs and gaseous diffusion and stuff of that, and we're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool because Chuck is an amazing guy and the Fowlers are awesome or something.
You have to really dig down into the details. Who are these guys? What are their fears and hopes in life? You have to get to know them. What do they look like? Was your hair parted to the side? What do you eat for breakfast? All those things, you really have to get into the details, because if you can't make a reader care about the people in the story, then they're not going to read. So you could have, the most fascinating subject for an investigation that there is, but if you want people to read it, they're going to have to care about the people in the story.
Yeah, I totally agree with Holbrook on that. And that's where the extensive interviews come into play. And they can't be marathon interviews, like you're going to interview someone for 4 hours, because you're not going to hold their attention. Your attention, it has to be in bite-sized chunks. So it's an hour here, half hour there. And it's also about talking about their lives and other subjects to make them feel comfortable. Because you get to know them, and you get to know their families, and you get to know what they like and don't like. And that helps go to their character and their motivation, because we always want to learn the why. Why didn't you walk away? Why did you do this? And when you talk to them, you understand why they did. And then the details come out. Ron's a kind of an open guy. He's passionate about everything he does. And, Chuck is more reserved about what he says, what he doesn't say. And so you reflect that in the writing, in the characters. And I think that we were able to do that because of the number of interviews we had, and we understood them, where they were born, where they were raised, what they thought. Those are really, they may seem silly to some report, but for us, that is really the cornerstone for developing characters.
And you have to develop trust. To get somebody to tell you that, man, my life was going out of control, I was eating handfuls of sleeping pills just to go to sleep, they have to trust you to tell you those kind of details about their lives. And those are the kind of details that I think make people care about the story, because he really was sacrificing, his physical health, but also his mental health, his relationships with his wife and his in-laws. He made a lot of sacrifices, but the first time you talk to him, very few people are going to tell you those kind of details about their personal life. That takes time and developing a relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And Mitch, you had said something about, having that patience and cultivating patience earlier. And it's so vital. But these days things move, so fast, and investigative journalism is, everyone will say it's important, but it's very devalued, and it's very resource intensive, and there aren't many people doing great investigative work because it's just so time intensive and resource intensive. But at boil it all down, it does come down to patience and trust, and a willingness, and knowing how important it is to get these stories out, because that's really ultimately what has to fuel you to get this kind of work out, I imagine.
It does. You have to remember to slow things down. And you're right. In this world where this fast-paced news cycle, and everybody wants to get it out first, and this is a different kind of genre, so to speak, a different kind of method that you have to use. You have to slow down. You have to build that trust. You can't expect to get these details on the first interview. More importantly, you have to show you care. You have to be empathetic, and you really listen to what that person is saying. And that can lead you into all sorts of directions. But really, for us, it's that time. You have to put in the time to know that person.
Yeah, and would you counsel other reporters out there to maybe find like a synergistic pair, to maybe do more co-bylined and co-researching stories out there to kind of spread a wider net and to bounce those ideas off each other?
I think it would be great if anybody could find someone who has the kind of work relationship that we do. You're gonna have to like them. You really are. I mean, this goes back to our days at the Associated Press. We would do these big investigations, and when we thought it was finished, we would get on the phone and we would read every line to one another, and then talk about where did we get this and how do we back this up. And if somebody challenges us, how can we quickly show them this is where it comes from? So you have a lot of intense conversations. You're spending a lot of time together. We kind of get each other's personality, and we have a similar humor. So all that works for us. But you're going to have to get along.
Yeah. And the other thing too about reading it back, besides footnoting, is you want to hear how the sentences sound. That's really important. How does it sound? Is it flowing? Because with writing, there's a certain rhythm, there's a certain cadence to good writers, and you can read it and you can hear it. And if it doesn't sound right, if something trips you up, then you go back and you look for other words. You look for ways to rephrase it. But that is so, to us, it's so important.
Yeah, it helps you recognize, is there a word echo here? Are we using the same word too close together? And if so, can we replace it with something else so you don't hear it twice, in two sentences? All those things. He's right. There's a flow. And by doing that is pretty labor intensive. But it's just a practice we started a long time ago, and we continue to do it.
Yeah, and when you have conversations that can be pretty heavy and intense with your sources, and you're taking a lot of that on. How do you decompress from heavy conversations that you're having repeatedly over and over again for over years sometimes?
Well, it's hard because we have worked on some major projects. Our last project with the Associated Press, we were Pulitzer finalists for investigative journalism for a project called Lethal Restraint. And it was really hard because you're watching and talking to people who have died, then you watch these videos, so it's really hard because you're dealing with death, you're dealing with people at the worst moments of their life. So I think one of the things that we do to decompress is, not only do we talk to each other, but we take breaks by, okay, once I step away from the computer, I'm going to watch something that's funny, that's a comedy, that's something that takes me out of, the immediate moment, right? And so you can relax a little that way. I think you have to do that because otherwise you can get sucked into a really dark world and it could affect you.
Yeah, you got to find a way to relax and laugh.
Yeah,
we joke around a lot, and we find ways to laugh because the work that we've done for our whole careers is you're looking at the dark side of life. We're writing about child abuse deaths and police deaths, and we've covered military, and you're writing about soldiers dying. So you have to find a way to get out of that darkness. Like Mitch said, watch a comedy, laugh a little. Yeah. Go watch your kids play sports. Get away from your phone and electronics and go outside. Spend time outdoors. That's one of my best recommendations.
Yeah. Try to get off the grid. On weekends, like if my kids are coming over, if I have I make sure I put the phone aside, and that's it. I'm not. You have to have that time to decompress. And if you're on your phone, you're looking at emails and you're looking at this and news. Step away, turn off the TV, focus on the people around you. And again, if you do watch TV, something light and that, a comedy, it's something.
Yeah.
Get away from the darkness.
Oh, for sure. And just as a piece of maybe reporting or writing advice, what is something that you've heard maybe from a cherished friend or mentor or just hard-earned advice that you like to bestow upon people who might be struggling with their writing and reporting? What's something you might offer for people out there and people in your inner circle who need some help?
I think we touched on this earlier. One thing is the details, and that really, I saw the importance of that when Mitch and I wrote our book together. He had written books before, but you really need those details to do this kind of narrative work. Was the coffee decaf? Those kind of things. Was it Starbucks? Whatever. You really need those details to do this long form work. And Mitch and I have always talked. We talk about how our voices are similar in our writing, and our outlook is. We've always talked about the humanity in a story, and I think that's more important than ever because you could go on ChatGPT and say, tell me everything you know about the Paducah gaseous diffusion plant. And from court records and congressional testimony, it's going to pull you some information together. Anybody can do that. But AI could not tell you that Ron Fowler had nightmares about children playing in a contaminated creek. You've got to spend the time with people to get those kind of details. That's what will set your work apart. And I think that's more important than ever. Do that work. Get those details. Put the humanity in the story, because without that, nobody's going to read it.
Well said.
Yeah, for sure. And to that point of those details, Seth Wickersham just wrote this 15,000 word profile on Sean Payton, the head coach of the Denver Broncos, about the lead up to the AFC Championship game last year. And when you were saying about the details, in there, he knew that Payton set the thermostat to 68 degrees because he wanted it cold. To keep everybody awake, and he knew his sleep score every single night because he was there shadowing him all the time. So he's got an impeccable eye for that detail, and for lack of a better term, the courage to ask the really stupid, inane question, is that decaf in your coffee or whatever it is, and they're gonna look at you like you're a freak. But you're like, oh no, this is a little detail that makes the story really pop. You got to believe me on this. You got to trust me on this.
Yeah, one thing to your point, though, I think a better description of Sean Payton, though, is the coach who helped the Saints win a Super Bowl.
There you go, spoken like a true Saints fan.
That's right. Who dat?
I have nothing to say since I'm a diehard Jets fan, so I'm a total loser. I mean,
oh my God. Well, I grew up in Massachusetts, so I'm sorry for the pain that we caused you.
yeah, you caused us a lot of pain over the years and still cause us a lot of pain, yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh, that's hilarious.
My season's over before it begins. I mean, it's...
Yeah. It's, oh my gosh. Yeah, it's rough. It's been a rough few decades. It's been rough since 1969 as a Jets fan.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'll leave you guys with one more question before we close up shop. Is that I always love asking the guests for just a fun recommendation of some kind, just anything you're finding fun that you want to share with the listeners out there. And so I'll just extend that to you. And maybe Mitch will lead with you, and then Holbrook.
I think as far as fun, I mean, watching, really funny shows like the new Larry David show on HBO, because you laugh and you just like escape everything. And so I would recommend just walking away, watching comedies and laughing.
Yeah, I think anything that you can find to make you laugh or give you a little excitement is worthwhile, and that's different for everybody. My hobby is flying, but that's not for everybody. But that's what I do for fun.
Oh, amazing! Gosh, have you always been into aviation?
I grew up around it. My dad was a private pilot just for fun. My brother's an airline pilot. So, yeah, I grew up around it.
Fantastic. Awesome. Well, this piece for the Atavist is it's so great and gripping, and I can't wait to see what more you're going to make of this story, too, going down the road. And that'll give us a great excuse to talk again down the road, I hope. So just thanks so much for coming on the show and talking some shop. This was awesome.
Yeah, I hope that we've said something that maybe will help some other writers out there. I mean, it is a tough time for us.
For sure.
In a lot of ways.
Well, thank you for having us on your show. We appreciate it.
Yep.
Yes. Awesome. Thanks to Sayward, Mitch, and Holbrook. Not too shabby, right? Read their story at magazine.atavist.com and consider subscribing. And no, I don't get kickbacks and commissions. Don't forget about that Hippocamp Online event. The one I'm moderating is the debut panel that is free to attend, though there is a sliding scale donation. That's Saturday, August 15th from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'll bring my CNF pod sensibility to this panel, so get your ass ready, people out there. Hippocampusmagazine.com, fool. As I flounder in rejection land, I've been digging deep into the trench of this podcast. It is a trench at times, isn't it? Whoever listens this far, I don't know, it's like 4 of you. And not really getting out from under the bottomless pile of books to read and interviews to produce. Like, I read 4 memoirs in the last 2 weeks, and the more memoirs I read, the less I like them. I feel like I need to tell people it's okay to be funny. If I ever dig back into my baseball memoir, I'm going to tear it up and make it a comedy. It's kind of funny as is, but I think it should just be comedy beginning to end. I already have a new title for it. Instead of The Tools of Ignorance, it'll be Gotta Beat the Traffic. Anyway. But when it comes to drawing up a pitch or even an essay, for instance, like I want to write a flash essay titled 343.66. That describes the runner Josh Kerr's world record mile race from a few weeks ago. That will take, on average, I hope, 3 minutes and 43 seconds to read. So he broke the mile. Yeah, he broke the mile. I want the essay to read in about the time it took him to run the race. Yeah, so there's that. And I've got reporting on the Cassini mission to Saturn to flesh out, and I've got Ken Griffey Jr. reporting to flesh out, and perhaps I've got 50th anniversary of the Lake Placid Winter Olympics to flesh out. And when you're pulled east and west and north and south at the same time, you're left with the dizzying paralysis and a confusion of how to start. And while I don't believe in writer's block, I can see how somewhat accomplished writers can get stuck. Like cars' tires are stuck in the mud. Like I need a bag of kitty litter. So throw that shit under the tires and spin out. I think it has more to do with having too many ideas and chasing too many rabbits that leaves you rooted in place. With the front runner, I had clarity, and I want that clarity again. So I guess I just have to pick one and report it out. So, okay, I think I do have some measure of clarity. As some of you know, my Ken Griffey Jr. biography was rejected, and I think it was largely rejected because the frontrunner didn't sell as well as they had hoped, which is my fault, of course, but also because I don't have a big platform or a legacy media institution behind me. I was told that it's all the more important that I have to make my own weather, and that's not exactly forecasting Category 5 book sales at the moment. So it's not so much the idea itself that's bad, but the writer behind it is not very attractive at all, physically and financially. And so in trying to build a weather system around Griffey, I finally landed on that coveted time peg that had been eluding me for some time that could help drum up some momentum. All right. So 2027 marks 40 years since he made his debut in the minors as a 17-year-old kid fresh out of high school. That's my target. Write a long feature about that time, before he breaks, before superstardom. Ken Griffey Jr. on the bus. It's also a Pac Northwest story. Since he spent most of that time in Bellingham, Washington, he was obviously drafted by the Seattle Mariners, and he spent a great chunk of time in that upper left 90 degrees of the continental United States. And I'm like, oh yeah, boom, that's it. That's the focus. Don't think about the book. Just think about that one narrow little aperture. Squeeze that aperture shut. And if that story gets a ton of attention, which I think it would, then I've got the weather system to maybe sell the book I want to write. And it's why we need to keep compendiums and journals of the books we write, so we can reference them and remind ourselves that we've done it before and we sure as fuck can do it again. So stay wild, CNFers. And if you can't do, interview. See ya.